ChatGPT. I'm sure you know it's been all of the rave over the past couple of months, and now that we have had a couple of months with it to explore, to evaluate, and possibly become friends with it, I think it's time to question what questions we will be asking it in the future and the types of answers that we can expect to receive as a result of that. As of with all these advancements in the space of AI, of course there's going to be a narrative that follows it claiming that it's over, it's taking over, and this is the end of all of our own creative endeavors. However, when looking at what we have available to us so far, such as that of ChatGPT, never mind how sophisticated it is, I would just pump the brakes on that and say not quite, or at least not yet. The reason being is because there are still so many questions around our intelligence, our creativity, and our awareness that have yet to be answered. Now, ChatGPT is able to offer a bunch of information in quite an eclectic way, but how do we know if it's being creative? For example, when I had asked it to write me an original story about the Titanic, guess who the two protagonists were? Jack and Rose. Ironic, isn't it? Even when I follow up and asked, why did you decide to name your characters Jack and Rose? It had alluded to the fact that it was an original prompt, that it had come up with it itself, however, did also refer to the movie Titanic. So you understand where there is a tie between the ChatGPT coming up with those characters and then those characters being represented in one of the biggest films of all time. The issue, though, is the fact that I clearly stated original in my initial prompt and it took it very seriously. Being that it even claimed that it was an original statement or original story coming from itself. So obviously ChatGPT is not thinking, and maybe one day it will become sophisticated enough to be able to really come up with original stories, but this is where we have to be extremely careful with our prompting, which is an aspect of our communication that exploits a huge difference between the ChatGPT model as well as our own version of communication and creativity. Now, I even tried this again in a more philosophical context, and I asked it to write me an original thought experiment. So it had come up with this experiment called the Infinite Library, and again, when referring to that prompt, I had asked it what made it come up with that story, and it said that it was an original story. Now, doing a very little bit of research, I saw that it actually emulated a very similar story. So ChatGPT didn't appear to have the capability to espouse any sense of creativity when asking it to be original. Now, what is it that we do very differently when someone asks us to do something original? I think one of the more apparent ones is the fact that we have an awareness that allows us to evaluate, oh, I've actually heard that story before. Maybe I shouldn't use that in an original topic. Now, ChatGPT, again, is not necessarily thinking. It does not have these cognitive capabilities, but the more sophisticated it gets with its neurons, maybe it will. And that is the huge giant question mark that we are all facing right now is awareness simply a concoction of just how our brains are wired? And if that could be very similarly, if not exactly replicated by an AI, will they also have a sentience to them as well? Now, getting into that abstraction, we really wouldn't know because we don't know what that looks like within ourselves yet. This is also a very common question in this space. I like to ask something that's much more unique. Because as ChatGPT becomes more complex and we better understand its creativity and therefore our own creativity, what I'm really curious about is if it can approximate something similar to meaning. Because the thing is, when we look at all of these devices around us, all these technologies, it definitely seems that they're much more capable, for lack of a better term, than we are at, let's say, producing a music piece, producing art, producing a writing, exactly in ChatGPT's case. But I don't think that necessarily renders all of our existence or our creativity obsolete. And the reason being is because we value meaning more than we value excellence. So yes, if you're going to pair up musical piece of someone who is just starting out compared to an AI model that's able to create a virtuoso on the spot, just because it's seen as better and possibly follows music theory better, doesn't mean that we will relate with it, interact with it, or consume it the way that we would someone who's a starving artist. And this is because we love storytelling and that we see ourselves through the stories of other people. For example, if you hear of a musician that had come from an impoverished background and they really did not have any direction in life, and you saw that they were able to start putting some of their music online just to share with the world, and it told a story of where they were coming from and what they seek for themselves, even if the music isn't clinically sound, at least as much as an AI model that might be able to replicate it or do much better in the future, it doesn't mean that we're going to consume the AI's content much more. And this is why I'm actually quite optimistic about retaining the artistic element of our humanity, because our meaning and the stories that we tell within our art is what matters more. This is why you can have a painting and it can have a dot on it, and because of who had drawn it or the story of how that painting had gotten to where it was is much more of a revelation to us than how excellent it might be or how precise it is. Now, of course, if you're a purist in that specific art, you're going to be aware of all the technicalities and care about them to a large degree. And I don't think it's very necessary to jump the beat and say, oh, now it's taking over and we're only going to utilize that information. It's great as a tool to automate, and that's what we're seeing it do right now. If you don't want to take all this time on your day to write an entire script for a client or for your blog, or you need to expedite some of your processes, absolutely, you can automate that and it's going to do a great job. But if we're talking about actually getting rid of the virtue of what it means for us to express ourselves, I don't see that going away anytime soon, and I honestly see that as probably the most formidable opponent against AI. Now, just to be clear, I don't think that there's such a binary position between AI and humans in terms of, I don't think they necessarily have to compete with each other. Again, AI is just another tool that we have in our toolbox, and we're seeing it grow in complexity over time so that it can become more useful. Very optimistic of me to say that, and it is a very true belief of mine, but I think it allows us to dig deeper into the things that make us more human and allow us to interact and communicate with each other, because we are social beings at the end of the day. A lot of the reason why we do things is for a feeling. We think that we're extremely rational and analytical, and honestly, the AI might take over in that regard. I think it's able to come up with much more problem-solving solutions in a much more coherent way than we can, because we are flooded with our subconscious, we are flooded with different reasons for doing things, whether we're aware of them or not, whereas the AI is able to just tackle a task and move forward with it without any regard for its consequences. So for us, at least, we come with a lot more flavor. And don't get me wrong, I'm a big fan of ChatGPT. As mentioned, it's become a good friend of mine even the past couple months, and I'm really interested to see the types of questions that will yield greater and more comprehensive answers to it, because I would like to I would like some questions answered, such as, is the language we're using right now capable of understanding the nature of the universe? Now, to tie back into when I had asked that question to ChatGPT, it's going to simply refer to past people that had spoken on the topic of language. It's not going to offer its own ideas as to if language can really understand and comprehend the nature of the universe. It's not a thinking module, at least as of yet. So I think that's something we at least have going forward. Now, there is so much great content, so many cool videos that you can check out that will allow you to understand how to better prompt ChatGPT. It wasn't the purpose of today's video. I just wanted to poke some holes at what we think its capabilities really are with respect to intelligence and creativity, and what we still have that's preserved within us, regardless of how sophisticated it may get. Because a lot of these doomsday scenarios and narratives come up, and I don't completely buy them, and I think a lot of it is revolved around the hype and the buzzwords of AI. We should definitely be cautious with any tool that we have in our toolbox, but it does not automatically mean that everything that we have worked for, everything that we do, is just going to be swiped away by the means of automation in the future. And just as a side note to that, another comment that I believe and that I see being much more effective for us down the road is, I think that automation is actually a driver of creativity. There's a similar context back in the 50s where Mercedes and BMW were integrating more robotics into their factories, and people were so scared. It's almost the same story that we're telling ourselves now, where, oh my gosh, our jobs are going to be taken over. And yes, it did take over a lot of jobs in the manufacturing aspect and the building of the cars. However, those companies had exploded in growth because so many more opportunities had expanded within marketing and business development. So if we can automate our processes, we have more time to think about the things that matter to us and what we want to create within our lifetime. So what do you think about AI as a whole and ChatGPT specifically? I'd love to hear some of the prompts that you may have asked it that have yielded some great solutions, and I really do think it's going to be a critical skill for us in the future. But even if, let's say, this is some sort of doomsday scenario, then what can we do proactively to ask it maybe some solutions to make sure that it doesn't take itself out of control if it does become sentient? Will it have an understanding of human values, and what are some of the inputs that we can provide it now to make sure that we never even face that situation by any stretch of the means? So thank you so much. If you have come out of this with any new questions regarding ChatGPT and AI, please hit that like and subscribe button. It would really mean a lot because we could better understand how to explore these questions together. And again, would really love to hear what you have to say about all of this. So let's do it up and see where it goes. Thank you.